Okay, I'm happy to continue this afternoon's session and to chair this specific one. We will continue our conference with another keynote. At the right of me is Professor Stefano Allievi of the University of Padova, and he will be talking on, and I just cite his title, Precarious Reality, Distorted Visibility, Mosques, Imams and Preachers in Italy, and all that in 40 minutes?
Even less.
Oh, even less.
Or even more things.
Oh, okay. So I am happy to give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. Luckily we had coffee anyway, because it will be hard, I promise. I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been invited. So it's the fault of the organizers that, by the way, I'm happy to thank a lot for the privilege they give to me. Well, I start from a premise which is not unuseful, and saying what is Italy from the religious point of view, which seems simple, but is not. Seems simple because the perception of Italians as well as of foreigners is that Italy is a Catholic country. That's it, the country of the Pope. That's it. I mean, from tourist guides to journalists to sociologists of religion, we normally see that Italy is a Catholic country. It's not that simple. There was a definition of Catholicism as being the religion of Italians. I would say that now we are in the situation of the Italy of religions, in the plural, obviously. It's not homogeneous anymore. Well, there is an explanation for this perception, which is Rome being the global center of Catholicism, the Catholic heritage in architecture, arts, landscape, the abundance of churches and basilicas here in Rome is impossible to unnoticed yet. Even more than that, Italy is the only country in the world in which the journalist specialized in religious issues is called Vaticanists. That gives the idea that we are focused on that. And even when you are locally involved in your municipality, it's called campanilism. Campanile is the bell tower. So, I mean, there is all that might explain this perception, which, on the other hand, is simply not true anymore. It's not true anymore, even statistically, because, well, first of all, because of the internal change in Catholicism. Even Catholicism should be understood in the plural. Movements, parishes, organizations are very different, even in their theology, not to mention their activity. But also because of the progressive pluralization of this country, we have at least more than 1.5 million of Italians who have a different religion from Catholicism, and I'm only speaking of the militants, the active believers, which is much more than the traditional minority. Jews are less than 30,000 in Italy. The Protestant Waldenses are more or less 35,000. Very few. So things have changed from this point of view. Of course, there is immigration from a lot of countries, at least 4.5 people of different religions. I mean, only 20% of immigrants are Catholic, even less. All the others belong to other religions. This has made Islam the second religion in Italy, as in many other countries of Europe. So this is just a premise to understand what we are talking about, what I will be talking about. So pluralism precedes immigration, but is perceived as being linked to immigration. But it's important to understand that it precedes it. Anyway, immigration, when this country has dealt with immigration, for instance, from the legislative point of view, has always focused on labor force, labor issues, and nothing more. There is not yet a single law concerning immigration that mentions the word culture or the word religion. So we still understand immigration in Italy as something which does not have any cultural or religious effect. Of course, it is not as such. Migration do have serious impact on culture and religion and durable cultural consequence. But this goes still unperceived in a way. Immigrants from Muslim countries are about 1/3 of immigrants in general. So that means that 2/3 come from Eastern Europe, Orthodox Europe, or other countries. What is interesting that all the others are not perceived in religious terms. The Arabs are Muslim by definition. A Romanian will never be talked about as an Orthodox. He's a Romanian. So these explain also the attention to Islam, which is not peculiar to Italy, obviously, but is part of the distorted visibility I put in the title. Islam is, let me put it as such, the target group when we talk about cultures and religions, not the Chinese, not the Romanian, not the others. Okay. The legislative process concerning migration, as I told before, has not really raised and much less solved the problem of cultural pluralization of Italy. Which is usually interpreted in the media with a slightly negative connotation that has been given in the political debate to the word multiculturalism. No reference to culture, as I told, no reference to religions. But it is interesting that the Muslim, or put it in a better way, the anti-Muslim debate started before the clashes. Normally one might think about to 9/11 classic. Well, the Black September of Islam in Italy is not 2001, but September 2000, in which three things happened in the same month on different levels that has changed the image of Islam immediately and completely. The first thing is on the political level, started the first case of a controversy about a mosque in a small town near Milano called Lodi, and the North League, the xenophobic Northern Party, decided to launch a campaign against mosques that since then has never ended. On the religious level, Archbishop of Bologna, former Archbishop of Bologna, Giacomo Biffi, issued a statement which officially was a letter to the Catholics of Bologna, but was intended for a national and even international public, saying that more or less it was impossible to integrate Muslims. And this has marked an enormous change inside the Catholic Church that up to that moment was very pro-immigrant and even pro-Muslim, helping them to find places to worship or whatever, helping them for fasting, Ramadan and other things. And the third change has been not politics, not religion, but on the cultural level, with a book written by a well-known politologist, Giovanni Sartori, which absolutely no knowledge of this issue, but wrote a book on multiculturalism, or against multiculturalism, that given the fact that it was coming by a politologist, was perceived as a scientific, even it was not. It was a pamphlet, basically, not particularly serious. And so we are even before 9/11, and Islam has become a target. Okay, this is important to keep in mind. And of course, after 9/11, things have worsened because, particularly on following the extraordinary, unprecedented success of the Oriana Fallaci's trilogy, Oriana Fallaci's 3 books on Islam. This Fallacious trilogy became a popular and durable bestseller. It's still a bestseller. But it's not only a cultural event. The problem is that these books have set the agenda, the media agenda, the political agenda for the following years. And still, in some ways. So the agenda has been set by those books, who launched a huge, enormous debate, unprecedented debate in Italy. And it's still like that. In the city where I live and teach, Padova, now we have a major from the North League, it's called Bitonci, and still his major target is Ramadan, worship places of Muslim, even kebab shops, and is even using Ebola as the fear of Ebola as a fighting tool against Muslims, etc. So just to explain, which is not something related to the past. What about Islam specifically? Yes, there has been some political institutional initiatives. In particular, in October 2005, the then Minister of Interior, Pisano, from the right wing, Berlusconi's government, established a Consulta per l'Islam, a consultative body, which was named by the minister, but it included some Muslims of different position and country, etc. This consulta was confirmed by the following left-wing government that lasted very shortly, and then, with the new Berlusconi's government, the Minister of the Interior came from the North League, was Roberto Maroni, and he decided to transform it from a consulta to a comitato, committee for Islam in Italy, which was interesting in its composition because, well, there was the former Muslim members, but also some academics with serious knowledge of Islam, and even few journalists that had no Islamic knowledge at all. I mean, there were some polemists in the Fallacian way concerning Islam. And it was clearly intended to soften the vague attempt of representativeness of the previous consulta, but in the end what happened is simply the comitato has not been, didn't have meetings anymore, and is, let's say, suspended. Has not been reactivated by the following presidents of council, prime ministers. So on one side we have this specificity, only Islam and only Islam as a consultative body. It's not only an Italian specificity. France, Belgium, etc. have the same kind of institution only for Muslims. There is this tendency to exceptionalize Muslims and Islam, creating specific bodies, specific laws sometimes. On the other hand, we have the traditional relations between the state and religions, which is in Italia is set by the Concordato. The Concordato give a privileged status to the Catholic Church. But in the Constitution are named also the Intese agreements that started with the approval of the new Concordat in '85, 1985. And, well, they were supposed to concern the relation between the state and all the main minorities that at that period were the Waldensians, the Jews, and few others, Lutherans, very, very small minorities. And only in 2007 there has been an attempt from that government to sign 6 new intese with Hindus, with Orthodox, not yet with Muslims. But all these intese has not been ratified by the parliament, and there's no debate anymore on this issue. Also, on the fault of Muslim, I would say something about that later. Nobody talks about the agreements because the intese, simply because there is a powerful lobby, which is not only the Catholic Church, but which is mainly the politicians who claim to have the Catholic vote. They don't want to sign an intesa that could lead to an agreement also, not only with Muslims, but with Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance. Okay, there was the idea to approve a law on religious freedom of minorities in order to solve the problem without giving a symbolic recognition to Muslims and others, but even this law has not been approved. So we are still at the same situation of 20 years ago, and even more when I started to work on these issues. So many debates on immigration, particularly culturally on Islam, but all this debate has been imported. I give you some examples. The debate on veil appeared in Italy before we have seen veils in Italian cities. The debate on mosques and minarets came before mosques and visible minarets were existing in Italy. The debate on genital mutilation came before empirical case has been discussed in Italian courts or something like that. The debate on freedom of expression through foreign cases like the assassination of Theo van Gogh, the Danish cartoon affairs, and of course before the Rushdie affair. The debate on internal terrorism came after 9/11 and London and Madrid bombings. And in Italy, we never had, contrary to other countries, any serious attempt of terrorist attack. And even the debate on the burqa, with the proposition of a law banning burqas from school, came before we have seen any burqa in the country, not here, and particularly not in schools. Never seen any burqa in any school in this country. But the proposition of a ban law was already there. So even the debate on multiculturalism has been reproduced after the statesmen of Cameron, Merkel, etc. And not. So what does it mean? That Italy, all this debate, all these issues made Italy the only country in which anti-multicultural discourses came before multiculturalist policies that we never had, which is ironic but problematic. This means that the perception of Islam has been characterized by these problematic topics, not physiological processes, but problematic pathologies. It has been pathologized from abroad, in a sense. There is also another problem, the fact that Italy does not have a colonial memory of racism, for instance, and cultural plurality management included in legislative terms, is part of the problem. This leads to underestimate, for instance, racist attitudes of Italians. There are always this myth of Italiani brava gente, Italians, good people. Okay, which is not true in our colonial experience, but it's a popular myth. It's a mainstream idea of the colonial role of Italy. And this also prevented reading immigration in post-colonial terms. There was a question on that before. as it happened in Germany, in France or in UK or in the Netherlands. It never happened in Italy. These are the negative factors. The positive factors that in dealing with Islam culturally has been two mainly, and the main one has been the role of the Catholic Church. The role of the Catholic Church, given the fact that both the left and the right wanted the Catholic vote, has been a moderating role in both senses. And in both cases. Practically the same organization that dealt with immigrants from the south of Italy to the north are now dealing with immigrants from other countries with the same attitude, the same has been done by parishes, by missionary organization, and so on. So this has helped in avoiding tough laws on immigration, which the right wing wanted clearly, for example. But they wanted also the Catholic vote. And so there was a problematic issue there. But there is also another issue that the left wing, and particularly trade unions, differently from other countries in Europe, have always played a positive role towards migration, not perceived as a concurrence, not mainly, but the mainstream discourse of trade unions has always been positive. Even though when you go to Islam, so to cultural issues, given the fact that trade unions and the left wing in general is more secularist, there is a sort of keen attention, I would say. Let's go to the question of mosques. Well, although forms of discrimination on the basis of religions have never been completely absent in Italy, I remember cases in the 50s against, and in the 60s against Jehovah's Witnesses or Pentecostal churches, for instance, which has been refused in some municipalities. But this has been few cases, but in recent year, no other case has the opening of places of worship taken up such a high profile as it has been the case of mosques. For many reasons. Of course, the disputes were not only on mosques, but on the adhan, on minarets, on cemeteries, and visibility of holo prayers, and so on. This is no exception. Italy has not been different from other countries. I have directed a huge research project on conflicts on mosques in Europe, and I met a lot of data showing a high level of conflicts in other countries as well. But there is a specificity of Italy, which is important to notice, and is that the xenophobic parties, the anti-Muslim parties all over Europe normally are not in power. They are powerful, but they don't have the government. In Italy, the North League has been in power. It had in their hands the Ministry of Interiors, among others, which deal with religious affairs as well, and has set the agenda for a whole government and for politics for years at the national level. But at the local level, is even worse. Most of immigrants are in the north of the country, which is the richest part of the country. Most of Muslims are in the north of the country. Most of mosques are in the north of the country. Well, the North League at present rule Veneto and Lombardia, which are, and until a few months ago, also Piedmont, which is the three main regions, the three richest regions in the country, those who hold most of the gross national product and so on. So conflicts are politically, not only cultural, but politically legitimated. And this is something that observers always don't observe enough, something that people tend to forget. For what concern our country, well, of course, with 4.5 million immigrants, 1/3 of them Muslims, more or less 2.5% of population, barely 800 hall of prayers. That means more or less 1,700 Muslims per mosque. It's an estimate, of course, but I did the estimates for all countries of Europe. Well, this seemed that Italy, with this data, is relatively open to Islam. 800 hall of prayers, not too bad. Okay. 1,700 Muslims per mosque, per hall of prayer is the European average. So it's not a problem. What is the problem? That when we go to conflicts, things are different. If we look closer to the situation, we have materials to understand the situation different. For instance, well, first of all, the level of the debate. In Italy, what has been allowed in terms of language while speaking of Muslims is incredible. I remember journalists from Sweden listening to speeches of North League or official ministers, whatever, even prime ministers, and saying, in our country, it's not allowed to say so. I mean, to understand how deep, how profound was the level of vulgarity, of offenses included in these speeches, it might be enough to substitute the word Muslim with the word Jew and see the effect that it makes. Well, this language has been allowed for a long period. It's culturally allowed, it's politically allowed, sometimes even religiously allowed. And which is not the case in many other countries. And also we talk of the level of the conflict. When there are conflicts, there are not always conflicts, but when there are conflicts, well, you have demonstration in which militants throw pig's urine in a place where it's supposed to build a mosque, would go with a pork to have a promenade in the area, the launch of bloods, pig's blood, whatever. There is a lot of, sometimes I'm a sociologist, but sometimes I try to explain that in terms of ethology, much more than sociology. Pig's urine to mark the territory, in a way. Anyway, if we go to other data, they are interesting, because when I give the general data, 800 hall of prayers, well, a lot. My research has been used by right-wing prominent politicians to say, look how open to Islam we are. But if you go, for instance, to purpose-built mosques, that means visible mosques, you have almost 200 in France, 100 in London, in Holland, more than 100 in the UK, 70 in Germany, as many in Belgium, and so on, and 5 in Italy. When you go to projects, mosques under construction, you have hundreds, possibly 200 in Germany, 60 in France, etc., and so on and so forth, and 6 or 7 in Italy. So visibility is clearly a problem. Let's go to Imams. I will not, well, I have published research on that, so there's a lot of information there. Let's go to Imams in Italy. The question of Imam and their selection and their level of instruction and their impact have never been taken seriously, I would say, on both sides, on Muslim side and on institutions sides. The process of selection has always been led, as in other countries of Europe, to the strength, or we would say to the weakness, of the respective Muslim communities, that in Southern Europe are much less strong and least financed than in the Central and Northern Europe. So they are more weak. Most mosques has been the result of the effort of a single ethnic community. Even though now most mosques are hall of prayers, I say mosque, I intend hall of prayers, are attended by people of many different countries and not even only Arab countries, etc. The board is still, in most cases, ethnical, single national. The Moroccans, the Egyptians, whatever, the Tunisians, whatever community was in the beginning at the foundation of the board. They might invite one or two for the other community, but the core of the board is still the same people. And this is true for the larger communities, Moroccans, Egyptians, Senegalese, but also for the smaller communities, even more, Bangladeshis, Mauritanians, etc. What does it mean? Well, when they become strong enough to enroll an imam, often, as Jorgen described before the process, these are imported imam, not even from that country, but from the region of origin, from the village of origin, with poor knowledge of Islam, with poor non-knowledge of the language, as he described before. Locally trained imams. And which role do they play? I try to synthesize like that. Their role is not, they ask it not to act as bridge builders between Muslim communities and society at large, but on the contrary, to act as frontier guards of identity, if you want. They are not there to interpret the role of Muslims in Western societies, but on the contrary, to confirm the parents in their traditional role and belief and testify that nothing has changed. They do not build a new home for Muslims, but they do the routine maintenance of old identities in the new context, like nomads carrying their tent in a different climate, more or less. The problem is the climate is not adapted to tents. This is why, by the way, these imams do not succeed in creating links, not even with the first generation completely, not to mention second generations. No link at all. They become a barrier in a way. And the problem is also what Jorgen mentioned before with the nasty word of ecclesiasticization. I used in other texts an easier word, which is churchification of the functions of this imam. But they are not able to do that. It's easier, you can pronounce it easier, but the concept is exactly what he said, and it's important, because these people are not able to play this function, involved in the fact of being churchified, in a way. And there is a demand also from the community around. The religious leaders of other religions, priests, pastors, want these people act as priests and pastors or rabbis. And the institution, local municipality, deal with them as if they were the bishop of Muslims, let's say, or whatever. And this is a problem, again. Of course, some mosques are there is also another problem that maybe is more peculiar to Italy or maybe to Spain and less to other countries, is that Islam in Italy is not a metropolitan phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon of big cities. Most mosques are in medium-sized or small cities, even villages and rural areas. This is what I call the sort of vernacular Islam, or vernacularly integrated Islam. It's not Italian Islam, it's local. And it's a different way to integrate as well. Of course, there are mosques that play a different role. The Mosque of Rome, for instance, has always played a key role in strategies of dialogue, institutional visibility, But in the meantime, I've never managed to create a large network of mosques affiliated to it. And the same has happened for some Islamic organizations at the national level. There are, of course, mosques that belong to Sufi groups, tariqas and whatever, Tablighi, Ikhwani, and so on. It is remarkable, with the remarkable exception of Morocco, which is the only country which has been able to create a network of initiatives, of mosques, of imam training as well. We don't have comparative issues like those of Diyanet or IGMG, simply because the Turkish presence is very small in this country. Another problem, I go quickly through my notes, the role of young Muslims, GMI, Giovani Musulmani Italiani and others, they try to act differently culturally, but when it's a question of khutbahs, I see more similarities than difference from their parents in terms of public attitudes. When it deals with acting officially as an imam, more or less they say the same things as their parents. I don't see many real changes. To show, there is another problem, the control of these people, of imam, local imam. Well, mosques are among the most controlled place all over Europe. You find carabinieri, polizia, political police, security service from the country of origin, CIA and Mossad even in some places. But to show how things work, I give you an example. Recent one, the Imam of San Donà di Piave, close to where I live, which has been expelled in August from Italy. It became a national case, of course. Why? Because in its khutbah, diffused with an English subtitle by Memory or .org, which is a Washington-based organization close to Israeli interests. But he was asking Allah to kill the Jews one by one, basically. Okay. Two important issues related to this case. First of all, all the imam of the area, the region, said approved the action of the minister, saying, away from the mosque, those who predicate death, the president of the Federazione Islamica del Veneto. I have many other examples, so I cut and go quickly to other things. On the other hand, the reaction of the local community is symptomatic. First of all, minimize. No, it's not true. Secondly, was a wrong translation, which is not true. It was a correct translation. But the real thing that strikes me, surprised me in a way, not surprised, but I simply observe, is the fact that this imam, for years, has taught to Moroccan kids the pleasure of dying while fighting the jihad and going to paradise, with no protest, not a single withdrawal of a kid, no protest for the community, from the fathers, okay. But imams are not the only issue, the only actors that play in the Muslim drama. If you want, we have also preachers. And occasional preachers are another issue. As another a recent example, a Bosniak preacher, Bilas Bosnic, occasionally hosted in several mosques of Italy, has convinced several people to go fight with the Daesh, with the ISIS. One of them went with his 2-year-old son in Aleppo and died there. And, well, interesting. Which is the control? I mean, is it difficult to go and preach in a mosque? No, it's very easy. It's very easy. Even if you say these kind of things, if you preach the caliphate in a way. So the question, I go to conclude. I will skip all the rest of this, the cultural conclusion, I go to another last issue, training of imams. Many attempts, many occasional attempts. I attended to some of them from different organizations, Ikhwani, the Quraysh, the Moroccan imams, and whatever. Not stable attempts. Islam is not enough organized at this point. The most serious attempts are not on training of imam officially, but has been made by institutions, universities, in which Muslims attend. It's not imam training, but there are several imams who are trained there, and they act as imam after and even before, which is interesting. And the interesting thing that is made by universities, including my university, we have a master's course also on Islam in Europe, which is attended mainly by Muslims, but not only. And the fees are paid by the Moroccan government or by Italian Muslims organization, that they pay people to attend these courses, which is an experience, is not an ideal type. I'm not suggesting that it is a solution, but it's something that is happening, and it has been happening for 4 years. So I stopped there the very last chapter was what I call the Khilafat effect. Exactly the fact that young people are now going there. I skip a big part, but simply to say that now there is a seducing, fascinating effect. The Khilafat exists. It's self-proclaimed, doesn't matter, but it exists. Well, 100,000 kilometers, square kilometers, 1/3 of Italy, 6 million people living under the rule of Daesh. It has the same effect, seducing effect, of the International Brigade in 36 in Spain. People go there because they want to go there, because to live entirely their ideas, and also because it's a nice adventure, and it's not too bad to go and be the proud knight fighting for the good, and so on and so forth. Well, I see there a huge problem. I did it much more long in my paper, but these people are going to fight for their ideas, and sometimes they come back with the aura of the fighter. I know I have been in touch with some people that came back, and the people like these guys. Exactly as in the 70s with the political terrorism in Italy, for instance. It was nice to have a friend who used political violence. It's not too bad, it's seducing. Well, I'm wondering which arms do mosques, do imams in Italy have to counter this seducing effect? And for the moment, I would say none. This effect is powerful, and it risks to become a crucial issue in Italy and in Europe in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Indeed, you really raised very actual, also very, issues that are at stake all over the world when we come to talk about Islam, about Daesh, etc. So we'll have much too short time to discuss all this. So therefore, I will give quickly the floor to Professor Sunier from Amsterdam University to reflect shortly on the talk of Professor Allievi.
I will do that shortly, I promise. I have 3 points. I want to thank you, by the way, Stefano, for your talk, and I also have the text here. That's my privilege, as being. Anyway, 3 points. One is a very specific issue you raised. You didn't mention here. You alluded to that, but in the text you refer to Intesa. Do I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
I find it interesting. Interesting explanation of, exceptionalism in a way. And it seems to me that this exceptionalism is becoming a strategy that is also applied elsewhere in different situations, different forms in other countries. I mean, for example, in the Netherlands, that has otherwise a rather French way of dealing with religion. You know, there is no recognition of any religion, including Islam, but then there is all kind of ways in which exceptions are arranged legally. Newcomers, wouldn't you agree that it is just a kind of reflection, a remark? Wouldn't you agree that this is mainly it's a way, it's a strategy to purify your legislation in a way? I mean, if you say, well, we change the whole system because there is a newcomer, you know, arriving, and how should we adapt to that? It's better to say, well, the system is still pure, still intact, but there's just these exceptions, and we make these little arrangements, be it cultural, religious, it doesn't matter, but as long as the kind of legislative structure behind that remains intact. I just want to have your thoughts on that. That's my first point. The second one is, well, you started with what is Italy? That's an interesting question, and I could, again, taking the example of my own country, what is the Netherlands, you know? So, in general, what is, if we try to make sense of the image, the image of Islam, all the kind of issues that now are in the air in all respect, to what extent is this country specific? And this is by way of maybe a kind of a provocative way of phrasing that. Wouldn't you agree that in fact this whole debate is really in the air, it's really on internet, it's really out there, and has increasingly hardly to do with the facts on the ground? What happens if you refer, for example, to, you know, vernacular Islam or local situations? To what extent, of course, they are in a way affected by that debate, but to what extent does the debate really inhibit or really change the agendas, the programs of local political actors or local political situations? What have you? So my point is, to what extent do you agree that we should increasingly really kind of distinguish or separate the debate, the global debate on Islam, from the facts on the ground locally? And my third point is maybe in a little bit in contradiction to what I just said, is when I read your piece, and also when I listen to you, it seems to me that your argument is there is a discrepancy between the number or the visibility of Islam and the kind of the heat of the debate, or the harshness of the debate. Well, my question to you is, could you expand on that? To what extent this has to do with each other? And I would argue, and again, I think it's the same in other countries. Is it a paradox that where there are so little, where Islam is so invisible, relatively invisible, the debate is, according to you, is really more harsh than elsewhere? Is this a paradox? Or is it consistent with this idea that behind the whole debate on Islam operates in a way is, you know, it's not so much we do not fear about what is there, but what might be there. And I'm thinking of debates on, you know, immigration neighborhoods that had a growing number of people from abroad, racism was not as big in neighborhoods where there was a high percentage of immigrants, but in the neighborhoods where there were hardly any immigrants. So it was the fear for what has to come. So again, this is my question to you, whether you think this has to do with the situation in Italy as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Thijl. Thank you very much. Well, I quickly try to answer, maybe. I'm not so sure about the third, but I'll try. The Intesa. Well, what is interesting is that the Intesa, the agreement with the religious community, could be a way to avoid exceptionalization, because you treat them like the others. But it is exactly the fact that you don't want to treat the Muslims like the others, so you avoid to talk of an Intesa. This is on the side of the state, but I've seen a big change on the side of Muslims. Muslims organization, in concurrence one to each other, they raised the issue of the Intesa 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Overtly, openly, harshly, I would say, with strong militancy, organizing conferences with academics as well, lobbying with the media. But it was more than 10 years ago, even 15 years ago. Then what they discovered, well, first they discovered they were in concurrence one each other, because all of the umbrella organizations said, I want to be the interlocutor of the state. No, I want to be. No, I want to be the interlocutor. So they show their division, the internal division to the state. They use it as an excuse, because you can solve the division with a federation, for instance, or with different Intesa. You don't have one Intesa with the Protestants. You have one with Lutherans, one with Baptists, one with Valdesia. So, I mean, what has struck me is that at a certain moment, after 4 or 5 years of huge debate on the Intesa, Muslims completely abandoned the issue. They surrendered. Why? And this is an interesting question for the Muslims who are present here. Why you abandon the issue? Because you don't know, you are not sure you will be the organization, or also because you understand that you are not prepared to the Intesa. You don't have the instrument, you don't have the capacity, you don't have, I don't know. It's issues that I might raise to my Muslim interlocutors. On the other hand, given the fact that it was the last part of my paper, but I've written it elsewhere, I consider the debates on Islam a substitutive discourse of debates on pluralism. What has changed in Europe, and particularly in Italy, is that we are plural and we were not, and our constitution were written when we were not, and now we are. But the debate is on what is considered the extreme case, Islam. But in this sense, I consider as a sociologist conflicts as having a positive role. I mean, you learn how to deal with issues, you form leaderships in conflicts, for instance, and so on. But in this sense, the fact of not debating the Intesa, not debating all these kind of things, helps in continuing to avoid the discourse on pluralism, because you're right, laws should change. The idea that Italians have of Italy, from the point of view of religious landscape, should change. When I deliver a conference on these issues, it's always a sort of big surprise from the audience. Oh, really? Are we so plural? We didn't know. So it's strange, it's new, it's not taught at school. And it's ridiculous, because you have the schoolmates that are 4 or 5 different religions in the same class. But you don't teach these. And to move to the second question, Well, you're right that it's not a specific process of for Italy. Probably one difference in the Italian case, but also the Spanish one, and in some sense also some Lutheran countries of the north, but with a completely different secularization process. So the difference between Italy and other countries, like the Netherlands, like Britain, Switzerland, Germany, is that Islam, interesting mistake. Italy was perceived and was self-perceiving itself as a monopolistic country from the religious point of view. We don't even have Catholics and Protestants. Protestants are 40,000 or so. Ridiculous. I mean, a small village. Not the Pentecostals, the new ones, but the old established churches. So, going from being a pluralistic country and acknowledge a bit more of pluralism, considering Islam, maybe it's easier or less surprising than going from a monopolistic situation to discovering that you're plural. Not only you have one more, but many. But I don't know. For what concerns vernacular Islam, two things. When there is not a prejudicial attitude against Muslims, it works. Integration works with vernacular Islam. At the local level, you know very well, I mean, the pastor, the mayor, and you try to solve the problem before they become huge problems, included the problem of all of prayers, etc. But if at the local government there is a party, like in large areas of this country, north part of this country, there is a party which is officially against Muslims, well, these movements, these parties, their interest is to raise conflict, not to solve conflict. If the conflict is solved, there's no reason for them to be there. So they want to raise conflicts. And so that makes integration and insertion, co-inclusion of Muslims much more difficult. The discrepancy, I'm not sure I've completely understood your question, so I will only say that I don't know the reasons of this discrepancy between the perception and what is happening on the ground. Maybe because the field is not studied. It's much more easy to write books on Islam or against Islam instead of going around like I do, a few other PhDs do, and taking a train or a bike or a motorbike, and go here and there interviewing people. It's much more complicated. So, and in Italy, the social studies are not well funded as in other countries. So, but it's not that the reason. But it was just a complaint. Well, even journalists do the same thing. It's much more easy to import a debate from France or for Denmark instead of going to watch what's really happening in mosques. Okay.